Okay, so this is a dedication for Lara Noik, who passed away on Sunday. She was a wonderful human being, wonderful nature, caring, and she married my friend Evan, who some of you may know, and may her neshama have an aliyah, and may the family only know comfort and simchas.
Shame, and it sounds really sad.
Sure.
I'll,
So,
I'll, I'll put a name by face.
yeah, used to it also. Anyway, so just one idea here. Um, in this book that we've been going through, compassion versus pity. They're trying to distinguish what the difference is. Jewish nation, as we discussed earlier, are compassionate and feel the pain of someone. That's something with more substance is compassion. Pity is to say, I feel sorry, shame. But compassion can lead to an action. Like, let's say, for someone, unfortunately, when you have a bereavement in a community, the community chips in and brings meals for the family, etc., and shows they care for that week of Shiva and sometimes after. So that's compassion. Pity is, oh, that's so bad, and then you get on with life. You just so that's the as far as I can see it, what the difference is. But and just one other thing, it says compassion of the wicked is cruel. So as we all know, in today's times, in modern Western societies and democracies, there's no death penalty for capital offenses, and according to Torah law, that's what should happen. Obviously, after a fair trial and person's been found guilty beyond reasonable doubt. And there's no death penalty anymore in most countries, and that actually goes against the will of Hashem and what's written in the Torah. I don't know where to quote it, but so that's being cruel to the kind, and it costs taxpayers' money to keep these individuals incarcerated at in a facility. So that's being cruel to the kind. And they say if you're cruel to the kind, then you kind to the if you're cruel to the kind, then you kind to the cruel. So that's being kind to the cruel. So it should be the other way around. It should be you kind to the kind and you cruel to the cruel. That's the way it should be.
Okay.
Okay.
Listen, personally, if you asked me, half the members of the ANC and SARS, I would quite happily pay my tax money, keep them in prison. But my tax money is not ever going to be that well spent. Just let's get started. Kevin, thank you for that dedication.
Thanks for letting me have the deal.
I wish Evan Noik long life. He's a wonderful person, and I knew her late father, Bradley Tapnack.
Yeah,
who used to work for Bradley Tapnack.
who passed away 6 months ago.
Yeah. So it's so she's released with her dad. All right.
Yeah, shame that the mom was taking a lot of strain, the sister and the brother.
I'm sure.
Hit two bereavements in 6 months. It's not.
I can't imagine.
Shame.
So let's do a bit of an aliyah for her neshama. What we did discuss is there were 2 points of view. There was the point of view of grama, which was causative or indirect damage, and there was garmi, which was direct damage. And what we learned is that the Gemara commented on Rabba's ruling that one's not liable for burning a loan document. Not everybody holds by that. A Mimar said the one who judges the laws of garmi exacts for the burning of a loan document the value of a loan document. In other words, the full amount that was written in the document. And the one who does not judge the laws of garmi exacts for the burning of a loan document the value of ordinary paper. So to take a very complicated story and make it simple is that what you have to see here is that one of the issues of garmi, meaning direct damage, is time periods, meaning that if there's a delayed reaction from what you've done to what has been felt, that's grama, indirect. In other words, you might have set a process in motion where we learn that if one hits a slave and they live for a certain amount of time, then you're not culpable for homicide. But if he dies within a relatively short period of time, it's, certainly if it's 24 hours, but I'm not sure offhand how long it extends to, there's culpability for homicide. Whether or not it's your property or your employee, you're still responsible for homicide and therefore the death penalty. So therefore we say if there's a delayed in reaction from the causative nature, that's grama. Garmi is direct. Okay, that's one thing. The other concept of garmi is a concept of abstraction, where it says that if there is abstraction, it still notes the abstraction as being valid, meaning I'm not burning mere paper of yours. What am I doing is I'm affecting, well, actually crippling your ability to collect on a debt as a creditor if I work in cahoots with the debtor and I burn the loan document because you've got no methods of recovery. And many of the poskim hold and acknowledge that. So that's one of the things to bear in mind. It's a complicated affair. Others see it as different. They say, look, if there's no actual discernible damage, then a conceptual damage, which is indiscernible, is not damage. Let me give you a term. Is that maybe dealing with a case where something has not altered in quality. Take wine. You haven't caused wine to sour. What you merely did is make it trafe. And therefore, there's no tangible loss of quality to the physical nature or the properties or chemical properties of the wine. Merely that a Jew can't drink it. So therefore, are you allowed to extract payment in that regard for damage or not? That's another consideration. The opinions both ways. So I can find cases where you guys would see it according to the laws of Garmi or Grama, depending, as we all have our own particular views. So it does. And one of the things here in the Gemara is not to go with our ordinary first gut instinct of reaction and go for the opinion we're comfortable with, but stretch ourselves and learn a little bit. Even if we don't end up agreeing with it, we'll just see things from a better point of view. I mean, the ideal thing is that before the leftist and rightist, or your conservatives and liberals, were so polarized in their position, we have an opinion of both. Let me give you one example before I go on in the Gemara. What you do is you generally have a capitalistic system which has within it social welfare to look after those that are not capable of looking after themselves due to mental illness, infirmity of age, or a myriad of factors, or where perhaps you donated your time and resources, not for free, but as a result of earning your salary, and you've been a contributing member of society so that when you retire, the country will look after you. Up until the time when you are independent and go to school, and then tertiary education, the country develops you. So in other words, it's a perfect blend between capitalism and communism, where there's social conscientiousness mixed with the entrepreneurial spirit. So balance in most ideas is probably the route to go, the middle. I don't know if I'm making sense to you, bless you. Same thing with intellectual property. What are we saying? Is that if you spend a lot of time developing a piece of software, you're not entitled to having everybody use it for free. But by the same token, when abused, medical companies can make billions and let those poor people, unfortunately, not get any sort of medical resources where it would be inexpensive to mass produce because of intellectual property, statute of limitation, myriad of other laws. So there has to be a balance between protecting the individual and protecting society at large. And part of the balances of society is finding where the application is appropriate of both polarized opinions. I don't know if you guys agree with what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Okay. Because so I'm not, guys, don't worry, I'm not left going woke or anything like that. I'm certainly not saying that. All I'm saying is that there's definitely a difference between being so marginal, but what causes the marginalization is the other side stands up for righteous indignation and is not even prepared to have a logical conversation because it offends their sensibilities. No discourse for discussion, and that's a sure sign of anarchy. So let's go on. And what we are saying is there was an incident involving the burning of a loan document, and Rafram pressured Rav Ashi and extracted from the burning document the entire amount written in it from his most superior properties, like the beams used for images. So what we said before is, look, you've got it on good authority that if Rafram pressured Rav Ashi, because Rav Ashi damaged this credited document of Rafram when he was younger. Generally, you're not even responsible if you do something minor. He held him responsible as an adult and said you have to make teshuvah. There's a case where this is exactly a case of burning a document with an abstract concept where there's the loan amount written in the document, and therefore this is evidence of the fact that not only was he able to collect from it, but collect from choice property for an infraction he made as a child. So the Gemara used the most extreme example to prove that the laws of Garmi take hold for many of them. So now we have a clause of the Mishnah that states, if one stole chametz and Pesach passed over it while it was in the robber's possession, the robber may say to the original owner, behold, what is yours is before. So all he's saying is, as far as the Mishnah is concerned, this is that the damage in this particular case with the chametz and the Pesach is one of what you call non-discernible damage. In other words, there is on a spiritual level a time period that passes over that if you are in possession of chametz during Pesach, afterwards no Jew can benefit from it. And therefore it's rendered. But is the bottle of Scotch whiskey actually damaged in any way, guys? Damaged?
Nah.
No. So there are a
Not, not to somebody non-Jewish, really.
Correct. So there are halachic opinions, according to this Gemara, that state the clause in our particular Mishnah, our Mishnah, guys, that says, behold, what is yours is before you. Meaning, Rabbi Meir says, particularly, if it's a indiscernible damage, it's the robber can return it. Okay? So we learned that before, but we're learning this is coming, this chametz and this Pesach is also coming from a different Mishnah. So the Gemara seeks to identify the author of this root. So who's the Tana that taught that we say that with respect to articles that are forbidden to benefit? Okay, like this, like for example, chametz and Pesach. Behold, what is yours is before. Meaning, when you benefit from something that is forbidden, you can return it to the original owner as is, where you don't have to make financial restitution, even though that person can't get benefit from it. I'll explain what. So Rav Chisda said it's a Mishnah authored by Rav Yaakov. Okay, but we learned. Okay, so in other words, guys, our Mishnah reflects the minority of Rav Yaakov. Rabbis, however, maintain that the robber can't exempt himself by payment by returning the stolen article after it became prohibited benefit. Okay? In other words, it seems to be that it's a minor opinion of certain people, not minor people, don't make that mistake. He's saying not the majority rabbinic opinion, but if they were minor people, they wouldn't be considered great people. Rav Yaakov, and certainly Rabbi Meir, who's a Tana, who said that if it's indiscernible damage, it doesn't constitute damage, but the general rabbinic opinion does. So only according to Rav Yaakov and Rabbi Meir can you return the item as it created damage. Okay? So Rav Chisda said The Mishnah is authored by Rav Yaakov, the Mishnah that mentions that clause of Chametz and Pesach. And if you remember, our particular Mishnah by Rabbi Meir's opinion supported something very similar, especially in the concept of Chametz and Pesach and Truma, and that became Tuma, etc. Because we learned in a Brisa, and in the case of an ox that killed a person, okay, before its guilty verdict was reached, if its owner sold it, it's sold. If he consecrated it, it's consecrated. If he slaughtered it, its meat is permitted. We learned that already, okay? So what we are saying is as follows, is that we're talking about here in Shmot, in Exodus chapter 21, verse 28, that the Torah commands that an ox that kills a person shall be executed by stoning, and its meat forbidden for benefit. Hanoah, you can't touch it. Okay. So in that particular case, if a verdict hadn't been rendered, you can do things in the meantime because it hasn't solidified its fate. The minute the guilty verdict has been reached, it's as if by general rabbinic opinion is that animal is condemned for benefit because you know what's going to happen. But until the guilty verdict is reached, sell it in the meantime, you got away with it. Consecrated. If you slaughtered it, the meat is permitted. But what happened with the person that bought it or from the other is the end? Well, before the guilty verdict, you're off the hook because nothing's tangible. You just have to make sure that when you use the person that's buying these things, that you're okay. It's probably best to consecrate it, guys, because you're not leaving somebody else for it not being able to get benefit. Because if you consecrated it to the temple, it no longer belongs to his fellow. And I think once you've put it on the altar, so one of the clauses here is if the custodian returned it to its owner, it's deemed returned. But that's before the guilty verdict. But after the guilty verdict was reached, if its owner sold it, it's null and void. It's not sold. If he consecrated it, it's not consecrated it. And if he slaughtered it, the meat is for sure prohibited. And the same with the custodian. If he returned it to its owner, it's not deemed returned. So Rav Yaakov said, even after its guilty verdict was reached, after the custodian returned it to its owner, it's deemed returned. Now that's a little bit unusual, but it seems to be consistent with his opinion in the fact that if chametz is stored by a Jew during Pesach and returned to the original owner, then what is his is before him. He's saying here the same thing. If it got given an abstraction, in other words, a guilty verdict, and you haven't actually slaughtered the animal, that's forbidden for benefit, can still return it damaged as is, because the animal is not yet executed. There's almost a case of, what do you call it, delay between the guilty verdict and the actual sentencing, and therefore that's known as grama, causative damage or indirect, because there's a delay and retardation in the time. Okay? So the Gemara is saying, listen, maybe they're arguing about the following point, that Rav Yaakov is in the minority of opinion, the same as Rabbi Meir, and holds that we say with respect to things that are forbidden, whether it's an animal that's been sentenced to death and you can't benefit from its flesh at all, or a bottle of whiskey that you kept during Pesach and you wanted to return it to the original person, you can. Either way, what is your behold, what is yours is before. Meaning, I never physically damaged it. Cow is not dead. The whiskey is not drunk. And qualitatively, it's the same. It's yours. But that's Rav Yaakov's minority. Okay? As far as the rabbis are concerned, Kamara is suggesting, don't say with respect to forbidden things for benefit, behold, what is yours is before. Meaning, is that the general rabbinic opinion is that if caused a loss by your decision, in other words, the person either lost money or it certainly has some sort of financial effect, then you can't just return it as is and you have to take accountability. So Rava rejects Rav Chisda's contention because this was Rav Chisda's suggestion Rabbi says we've got a problem, and he brings a very good problem. He said, look, Rabbi said to Rav Chisda, no, you can't say that that's the proposal. Because what Rav Chisda was proposing is that Rav Yaakov has this opinion about what is causes before you, and that the rabbis generally say it's not the case, and it's only a minority of that says don't pout for indiscernible damage. And Rabbi says no, it's actually the general rabbinic opinion. So how does he? He says, look, the truth is according to everybody, Rabbi's opinion, even the rabbis. He say with respect to things forbidden for benefit, behold what is yours before you. In other words, he's saying that the general rabbinic opinion is exactly that. It's not just Rabbi Meir or Rabbi Yaakov. It's in fact that if you haven't created actual damage and it's just indiscernible or an abstraction, you can return it to the original owner as is. He said that's the general rabbinic opinion. What's his proof? He said, because if it was so, Rav Chisda, as you suggest, that the rabbis dispute that point, let them dispute the law with respect to a robber who returns chametz that became prohibited on Pesach. So what he's actually saying is as follows, which is interesting. If that the rabbis hold that one can't say about forbidden things, that for benefit, what is yours is before you, then rather than stating that only with regard to the acts, how do I say this? Okay, so if we have a look here, there seems to be a difference in that, as far as the ox is concerned, that has been given the death sentence. The minute sentence is passed, that opinion is you can't return it as is. So why with Pesach do the rabbis turn around and say you can return the object as it was before you? In other words, he's saying that the rabbis don't seem to hold, with regards to Pesach, that you can't return the whiskey as it. So he's saying you've got a problem. In the case of the ox, the rabbis are saying no. If it's forbidden for benefit, you have to pay the original owner. But as far as Pesach is concerned, if it's forbidden for benefit, you can just return the whiskey as is, and you don't have to pay the owner. So he's saying to Rav Chisda, Bava saying that there's more at play. So there's got to be some sort of issue that they have with the ox itself, which causes the problem. And it's not an issue of indiscernible damage and discernible damage. So what's the issue that Rabbi proposes? He advances a different basis for the dispute. Okay, what did he say? He said Rav Yaakov and the rabbis are actually disputing whether the court can adjudicate the case of an ox and condemn it to stoning when it's not in the ox's presence. In other words, there's a pasuk which says we finalize the verdict of an ox not in its presence or in its presence. That's the whole argument. In other words, there's some rabbinic opinion that says that within the trial of handing down the actual verdict or the hearing of the testimony upon which that verdict is based, it can be held without the ox being present. And there are other opinions that say the ox presence is required. Okay, so you would say, well, what the hell is going on here? Because according to respective views with the rabbis and Rav Yaakov, it's dealing with a case of judging an ox in absentia. What does absentia mean? If the ox is absent. So I looked into this case of absentia. I thought to myself, listen, something's very wrong here. What do you mean that an ox has to sit there for sentencing? Is an ox going to wake up and say, yeah, I made an avera. I killed a person. I need to really do teshuvah, and I really understand the sentence that's being passed down on me. The ox is not intellectual. So we're saying, why do we do that? Because whenever we take a man-made law and apply it to an animal, we apply other intricacies of the case as well. We learned that in previous Gemaras, to many of the opinions, with regards to lashes or with regards to death sentences or monetary damages, etc. Do you remember we learned cases of saying when there's monetary cases in terms of property damage, whether it's your ox that damages, or slave that damages, it's still your property, and we can extrapolate the laws of man to animal. In certain cases, in other cases, animals to man, and in certain cases you cannot, when you're having cases of premeditation or cognitive ability. But in many of the cases, some of the factors that appear in the court, when you're passing sentences down on a man, you have that same sort of principle with an animal. Does that make sense, guys? Whether or not it's logical, but certain court applications apply. So there's some rabbinical opinion that turns around and says, listen, who cares if the animal doesn't know what's going on? And other opinions that say, no, we're extrapolating the laws of man to animal. Other parts of the trial have to be there. And it could be there just to be able to identify the ox on a physical level. So if Rava's saying there's two different opinions with regards to the ox's opinion of being present, you're dealing with an issue here where the custodian is responsible, because in the one particular case, he returns it to the court. And in fact, if the court has the ox present, it can basically run a sentence on the ox. If the custodian gets rid of the ox and hides it and returns it to the original owner, there's no sentence passed on the ox. Now that is not indirect damage, because what's deemed as indirect damage is when a custodian was neglectful and due to his negligence didn't watch the ox kill a person properly. And therefore that's abstraction, because he never caused death of the person. His lack of awareness and that negligence caused the death of the person, and therefore the ox to get the death sentence. But because there's delayed processing and not a direct causative nature, it has now been a case of indirect. If he takes the ox to the court, where according to those opinions, the ox has to be present, and then a death sentence put on the ox, he's in fact taken an ox to the slaughter, and it's as if he chopped the ox in half with an axe, because his action of physically taking it to the court where they need the animal's presence in order to sentence it has caused the original owner damage. So basically, Rava is saying, if you're holding by the opinion where the animal doesn't have to be present, what damage have you done? If you're holding that the animal does have to be present, the minute the custodian has returned it to the court instead of the original owner, he's the one that's created direct damage and cost him an ox. And that's the issue at which is in play. You don't have this problem with the chametz, because all that happened with the chametz is it was in his possession while Pesach passed over it. He was not allowed to have it for benefit, but he never smashed the whiskey. There he's smashing the ox by ensuring it gets the death penalty. He's part of the problem. Do you get what I'm saying? That's what Rava's saying. So I'm just going to read it in the Gemara so we understand we've got 10 minutes left. So Rava said, Rava, when Rav Yaakov and the rabbis are disputing whether the court can adjudicate the case of an ox and condemn it to stoning, not in the ox's presence, the rabbis hold that the court cannot adjudicate the case of an ox and condemn it to stoning when not in the ox's presence, because it has to follow human law protocol that the witness has to be witness box when sentenced. Hence, the owner of the ox says to the custodian, you've done this to me. In other words, had you brought the ox to me directly, I would have hid it, driven it away to a swamp from the eyes of the court. Okay? And now by handing it over directly to the court, where the ox has to be present for its sentencing, we actually delivered it to the clutches of the one whom I can't litigate to retrieve it. Okay? And basically, so that's the rabbinic opinion. Rav Yaakov holds that the court can adjudicate the ox's case without the ox being present. So according to Rav Yaakov, the custodian can say to the owner, listen, what have I done to your ox? In the end of the day, the court would have adjudicated the case and condemned it to stoning even when not in the ox's presence. So in other words, you got the ox, but if sentence was passed, you can't use that ox. So I haven't caused it. Had it been the opinion of the rabbis who says the ox has to be present, fine. Rav Yaakov holds the ox doesn't have to be present, so that the custodian didn't create that actual damage by being involved in the ox sentencing. So the Gemara says, Rav Chisda found Rabbi Bar Shmuel, who said, and he said to him, have you learned any brisa with respect to the rabbi's position regarding the stolen articles that became forbidden for benefit? In other words, what Rav Chisda is doing is, in his humility, is he's trying to find a source from Rabbi Bar Shmuel, which is different to Rabbi. He said, well, listen, if I'm wrong, you must just let me know. So Rabbi Bar Shmuel said to him, I've learned the following brisa. The verse already states, and he shall return the stolen article. So it says that basically what purpose is there? Guys, for the pasuk in Torah to state in the next verse that he stole. In other words, he shall return the stolen article that he stole. The word that he stole is superfluous, and we know there's no superfluous words in the Torah. So it's coming to teach that additional phrase that you've got to return the stolen article itself in the same state as he stole it. In other words, if you return the whiskey in the same state that it was before Pesach, according to the rabbinical opinion of Rabbah, you haven't done any damage to it. So on the basis that the sages said when the coin is stolen and became disqualified, fruits and they rotted, wine and it soured, teruma and it became tameh, chametz and Pesach passed by it, an animal in a transgression was performed with it. When ox and it killed, as long as its guilty verdict has not been reached, for example, in all those cases he says to the owner, behold, what is yours is before you. In other words, it doesn't acknowledge that indiscernible damage is payable. Now, who is the one that you heard say this case of an ox that killed a person as long as its guilty verdict has not been reached? Yes, it may be returned as it is. But after its guilty verdict was reached, no, it may not be returned. So the rabbis who argued Rav Yaakov, so the brisa which states that the robber may return the ox so long as the verdict was not reached, was first authored by the rabbis and not by Rav Yaakov. And nevertheless, the same brisa states if one stole chametz and Pesach passed by it, he says to the owner, behold what is before you. Evidently, Rabbah was correct in asserting that even the rabbis agree that a robber may return a stolen article that became forbidden for benefit as is. And the reason they disagree in the case of an ox, the rabbis that killed, is because of a different reason. Is that according to rabbis, they're saying that the ox has to be present in court. And what happened is this custodian delivered it to the court instead of delivering it to the original owner. Because he's not defeating the ends of justice. There's only an obligation to return an ownerless cow to the court, not somebody else's. You've got no business helping the court cost this person money when you were paid as a custodian to stop it from damaging in the first place. Now you want to get his animal killed. Leave it alone. Return it to the original owner. You were paid to look after it. Let him deal with it. So we're saying in that case, the animal has to be present in order to have conviction according to the rabbis. According to Rav Yaakov, the animal doesn't have to be present. And therefore, what damage has the custodian done? And that's what causes the discrepancy. So the Gemara notes on the last aspect, and we're done, guys. We've got 4 minutes. So there's a contradiction between the brisa and the Mishnah. So brisa states if one stole fruits and they rotted, he says to the owner, behold, what is yours is before you. But we learned something different in our Mishnah. We learned that when you stole fruits and they rotted, it pays at the time of the robbery. The reason being is that discernible damage. You had a physical fruit and they rotted, meaning that the robber has caused physical damage, but the brisa says you don't pay for that damage. This is discernible damage. So the Gemara fixes the contradiction, and Rav Papa answers it, and they said, look, in the Mishnah, which rules that you can't return the rotten fruits as is, and you have to make financial restitution because of discernible damage, is where they rotted in their entirety. But the Bryce is talking about where there's a bit of partial rot. So they're 2 different cases. All right, guys, I'm done. I don't know if you have any questions, but you understand the nuance of what I'm saying.
Damon, so why does it just start with this, the rotting fruit? Has that got anything to do with the custodian who was supposed to watch this fruit and ensure that it didn't?
No. What we're talking about are 2 different cases. Everything is based on our Mishnah. Our Mishnah says, look, certain things you pay for. If you did damage that can be seen with the eye, you burned somebody's field, you pay. anything that's an abstraction is considered groma, indirect or an abstraction, you don't pay. Okay, that's according to Rabbi Meir. So Rabbi is saying that that is the general rabbinic opinion. It's not a lone opinion of Rabbi Meir. It just so happens that he leads the opinion, and Rav Chisda is saying, no, it's not the case, is that we want to say that he was saying the general rabbinic opinion is that you have to take responsibility for indiscernible damage, and the rabbis say that you do. And at the end of the day, you have to make restitution, even if it's an abstraction. Rabbi's just proven here. It said, no, it's not the case. Because if we look at Pesach and whiskey that's now not allowed for benefit, return it to the original owner as is, which is the general rabbinic opinion, because no discernible qualitative loss of the whiskey, nor was it drunk. But with the ox, the reason why there was an issue was, according to the rabbinic opinion, why the custodian has to pay, even though it's a death sentence and it's an abstraction, it's words. Because at the end of the day, he was participating in the animal by taking it to the court in order that a guilty verdict could be reached, and therefore caused the owner the loss of this animal, when in fact, if it was returned to the owner, they couldn't have reached a guilty verdict because the animal has to be at the trial, same as with a human trial. Whereas Rav Yaakov turned around and says the animal doesn't have to be at the trial, it's not a human. And therefore the custodian didn't do anything wrong. So all he did was being negligent and not watching the animal, and that's why the animal's got a death sentence. But he didn't help to kill the animal. What he did do is cost the person the animal, but negligence is not considered direct damage. He didn't pick up an axe and kill the ox. His failure to watch the animal allowed it to kill at somebody, and therefore the ox was killed. But he never handed it over to the court, because even if he did, the ox doesn't have to be present for a sentence or verdict. So that's not direct damage. There's a delay. So that's the issue at hand. The rotted fruit is just proving that a case where there's discernible damage is payment. That's all we're dealing with, guys. Very simple. We've done. Got a Mishnah next time. I hope I made it clear.
That was clear. It was a nice little summary, Kevin. Thanks for asking, because I had a bit of distortion in the connection. So I missed one or two little things. That was great.
Sorry if I didn't make it clear, guys. Really apologize.
No. I actually.
No, you explained very well. We can never explain it the way you do it. Jeez.
Yeah, and you did it